Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of our live Q&A. My name is Markus. I am your host, and this week we are going to be talking about creating a 5-star class experience for your members. This is a topic that I think a lot of gym owners just kind of phone in, assuming that, being a good coach and, kind of staying relatively on time is good enough. And they tend to focus their attention on marketing, on sales and all that. So today we're going to kind of take it back to the core and hopefully give you guys some value and something that you guys can implement today. I'm going to be discussing not only, the anatomy of what creates a great class experience, but I'm also going to be providing you guys a free download with a class audit sheet that you guys can use to implement the example that I'm going to give you guys today. Obviously, take with it, run with it, make your own version. I encourage you to do so. This should really just be a starting point, but let's dig in. So why should a gym owner care about this? I'm going to start by saying that this is your core service, guys. This is what your members experience day to day. Like I said, most gym owners, I think, kind of assume that just showing up on time and taking people through the class while, staying relatively on schedule for the most part is good enough. And that, great programming is good enough. But the truth is this: you have the opportunity to make your class, your members' favorite hour of the day. That is a massive opportunity and privilege. So treat it accordingly and take advantage of it. Create a wow experience, and your members will be more than happy, but it'll show through retention. It'll show through enthusiasm. And oftentimes, again, this is the piece that's kind of overlooked with a lot of gyms, where they get so focused on everything else that this just kind of gets forgotten about, and is a good thing to revisit and really get dialed in before we get into the new year here, where you're going to have a ton of new people coming in through your doors, hopefully. So also, on a side note about this, because this is one of the feedback, some of the things I'll get for feedback on this is that oftentimes they'll be like, yeah, but that was like my 5th class of the day, exhausting doing that many back to back. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many sessions you've coached that day or whatever else might cause you to not be on your A game. Suck it up and nail it, or find someone else who can do it. Get smarter about your scheduling. Maybe you shouldn't be coaching 6, 7 classes a day and need to become a little bit smarter about building in breaks or getting some help. And even if that's with an assistant coach or anything to help get you through that and make sure that you can knock it out of the park each class. There should be no excuse. Every single class or session that you host should be 100%. You should be showing up, smile, you're on stage, deliver. And I don't mean that in some hokey kind of way. I mean that be your best self, engage. And I'm going to give you guys some principles here to follow, because basically the goal for each session should be to make them feel like they've been educated, they've been entertained, and they've been inspired. I borrow the seminar. I think this is one of the principles they teach. It's been a few years since I took it, but I think it's a really important thing to understand that the goal isn't just, being a good, I think it was teaching, seeing, correcting, presence and attitude, group management, demo. There's like the technical skill set, and then there's how we want to make them feel. And that's the important part. And that's really what we're going to dig in today. And the goal of that being to develop relationships and results. So anyway, so let's get right into it here. So the way that I'd like to approach this is, basically, how can you implement a way to elevate the class structure? And even if you've never had, let's just say you have no formal structure, right? You're just, hey, we've just had good coaches. I trust that they know what they're doing. They're all, doing their version of class, and it seems to be working well enough. So I'll kind of be starting there, because that tends to be the majority. If you're a little bit further along, you can kind of pick up wherever is appropriate for you. But basically, step 1 is to define the standard. So I'm going to walk you guys through a basic format. And this is the format that I used at my gym at Active. And I'm going to basically walk you guys through the class shadow scorecard, because this is how we would measure it, but it'll obviously teach you what we would do at the same time. So at the very first part, we're going to talk about whiteboard intro. So the way we broke it down is we made sure that we had a warm and personable welcome. before we got into anything else. So take 30 seconds to a minute or two even to just kind of warm up the group, kind of bring everybody in. Hey, 4:15 class, everybody come on in. All right, so how's everybody doing? Like, and pick one or two people out, use names, soften the group up, make people feel really welcome before you get anything technical. The next thing is before you get into the workout of the day and start talking about what's behind you, talk about any announcements that you guys have. This is huge for upcoming events or that, that workshop or whatever you've got going on. We always had a designated area on the whiteboard where we would actually have all that stuff written out. So you can kind of reference that. And when you're bringing up announcements, and this is something I actually mentioned in a show we did a few weeks back for the perceived value building system, and how we promote things, don't just point and say, oh, we've got a party on Friday, blah, blah. Get into it, engage with people again, use people's names. Hey, what are you doing next Friday? And it'll make it a lot more fun. Then we get into the workout of the day. And this is really, we called it our what and why. So what we would do is we'd say, okay, so here's what we're going to be doing for warm up. Here's part one, here's part two. But as we're explaining it, we're explaining what we're doing and why. You don't need to get into an overly complicated description. Remember, you want to just explain it in plain English so that the people who are sitting here, taking this in, most of these people have no idea what the reasoning for your programming is, or why would we do, a tempo like that, or why would we do that than this? I thought we just did, legs yesterday, or whatever is going through their head. Think of it as in, I got to just make sure they understand the purpose of what we're doing today, because you're going to get a lot more buy-in and less resistance if you explain it that way. So here's what we're looking for. Here's what we're going to be doing and why. Then we would say, and now here's what I'm going to be looking for as I'm explaining each section. So not just what and why, but I always would give an example from a positive light of what I'd like to see. And if I'm going to point out something that I don't want to see, I will do so, but I'll usually kind of do it in a light way. And I mean, for me, it was always humor, but explain what you're looking for and kind of what you're not looking for. So that's kind of what would sum up our whiteboard intro. The next piece would be a structured warm-up. A lot of times people say, oh, we all just kind of do the same warm-up every day. I'm not here to talk to you about your programming. That's totally up to you. But for us, it was really important that we would have a warm-up that had these key elements. So again, we'd say, this is what we're going to be doing, and we'd be explaining why as we go through it. So for example, we're going to say, hey, everybody, head out on 400. When you come back in, line up in front of the door. We're going to start with some inchworms. We're saying, here's what we're looking to warm up. We're trying to get your shoulders going. You're trying to get your hamstrings, and just give them a little bit of explanation while they're doing it. People like to get a little bit of education. And again, keep it light, use your personality, but what and why. And we would always make sure that the coach would demo the movements, even if it was just for a warm-up, so that people really, even if it's their 10th class or it's their 100th class, they always know exactly what perfect movement looks like. And then we would always integrate some form of a social element. So whether it was, hey, if you see any new faces in the group, when you guys head out on your run, make sure you get to know them. There'll be a test when you get back, and just make a joke of it and call one person out or something. Or team people up or wall balls over the bar together, even if it's just for fun and not even necessarily pertaining to like something that's, always completely necessary from a technical standpoint. Just a little bit of social interaction. Some people call it in like the level 1 or whatnot, they'll call it your icebreaker, which is really what this is trying to do. You're trying to get people socially having fun, laughing, smiling, having a good time before we get into the technical stuff. So for us, the next step would be part 1. This would typically be some form of strength or skill work that we would do. Again, what and why, and demoing the movements, and creating a social element to some degree, even if that just means, hey, pair up, share a bar, or something of that nature to get people to engage again just a little bit. Then part 2, demoed movements, and that's if there was a 1, 2, and 3. Sometimes there's just 1 and 2, and then we would get to kind of more the like Metcon-y kind of thing, but same structure applies. And this is the key here to where I think most people, some people of you may be following along saying, yeah, I'm doing most of that stuff already. The post-WOD piece was huge, because what we want to do is we want to make sure we're creating an experience that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is that intro and it's that warm up and it's kind of the loose social thing. Then we get into part one, part two, whatever you've got going on for kind of the real programming piece. And then at the end, having some form of, it doesn't have to be like a technical or physical cool down per se, but it's more of like an emotional cool down, closure to the class kind of a thing. Because what you don't want to have happen is that your members after the workout, even if you sent them out on like a cool down run or something, that they just kind of like peter out. And some people kind of filter out the back door. Some people are hanging out front socializing. You want to kind of bring everybody back in together and provide closure. So we would have some form of structured cool down, even if it was just a quick jog or walk to the end of the alley and back or something. Instructions to clean up and put away gear every single time. Instructions to put the scores up on the whiteboard every time. Providing a teaser for tomorrow, saying, "Hey, awesome! You guys did killer today, and tomorrow we've got blah blah blah." You don't even have to tell them necessarily what the workout of the day is if you guys still have that like surprise element, but really just tease that out for tomorrow. Again, provide a social element. Hey, hit everybody with a high five on your way out, and then a warm goodbye and thank you. And the warm goodbye and thank you can be just like a, "Hey guys, thanks. You guys crushed it today in class. Thanks for coming. Looking forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day." A formal closure goes a really long way. And then we'd be checking, obviously, if class time and everything was on time. So that was our structure. And I know that may not seem like rocket science, but the key here is that we created a standard and a framework that we can all follow. Everyone has their own personality, has their own style, but there's a consistency that now we can manage and measure rather than it just being this arbitrary, like, hey, we're taking people through workouts on time kind of a thing, right? It really professionalizes what you're doing and starts to create a branded experience for people at your gym, okay? So I'm going to flip back. So that was kind of the first part. I walked you guys through an example. So once you guys have created the standard, step two is to decide how you're going to measure it. Okay. Now you want to do this before you do any implementation. That's step three. So what I would suggest is regular shadowing sessions. And I'll give you more on exactly how to kind of roll that out when you're first getting started. But you want to build this into your regular routine. We would have quarterly sessions, monthly shadowing sessions. So 3 per quarter that we would do at my gym, that once we had gotten the standard in place and gotten it all ramped up and everyone was on the same page, that's how we would maintain it. And the process was the head coach would review the previous scorecards prior to shadowing the session so they could freshen up on any direction they'd given the coach previously. Then the head coach would shadow the class. This has no interference. Even if something goes wrong, don't interfere. Just notate it. You're just observing. And then the coach would discuss the observations with the coach immediately after the class. So make sure you time it so that you have another coach ready, or it's like the end of their shift or something, so that everything is fresh. Super important, because we noticed the big difference between, like, if I shadowed you in the morning and then I gave you feedback at the end of the day and you've done 4 classes since then or 2 classes since then, or it's just been a whole day, that neither of us are going to be quite as fresh on what we talked about, especially the person I'm shadowing. Versus if I shadowed them and immediately went into feedback, they're gonna be like, I know I skipped this or I missed that. And so it's gonna be a lot more effective that way. And so what we would do is we would say feedback for that class. So this is the observations and the feedback afterwards. So we would give feedback for that class, action items for how they can improve that, and discuss how or whether or not they've improved from the last session. So feedback you may have given them, like, hey, you weren't using people's names, and this time you were. So you can actually kind of tie everything together and make sure people are actually taking the feedback and applying it rather than you're giving the same feedback over and over. Then we would add it to their coach's file, and then we would do a quarterly review where we would actually review all of the scorecards for that quarter in order to see, are they progressing? Are they listening? And then ask them any ideas on how we can improve the structure. Okay, so that was how we decided. But really important that you have that identified before you get to stage 3. Okay, so stage 3, implementation. So when we first rolled this out, we shadowed each coach 1 class per week for a whole quarter so that we really dialed it in. It was really important that we got adoption like 100% across the board. No stragglers, And any weak links, we would be able to work with them in really, really close frequency or high frequency so that we could make a lot of progress quickly. I kind of looked at it like I was on-ramping my coaches to all adopt this standard rather than kind of this slow rollout and it kind of petering out. Hit them with it hard. So what we would do is, what I would say is that it's super important to teach and practice with the team before expecting anyone to follow this. Okay, so implement a standard and, they would do it for a little bit and then they wouldn't follow through, or, some coaches adopted it and others didn't. It's super important that you set a few hours aside when you first want to roll this out, where you get your coaches into the gym on off time, you pay them for the time if you need to. And I suggest that you do, so that they take it seriously. Make this required. This isn't a hope you guys can show up. This is an absolute requirement. And you want to teach them what the structure is and why it's important. Get them to buy in on the why, and then have them rotate, shadowing each other. Make it really fun. Get them engaged. Ask them for any feedback or ideas that they think could improve this structure, and then explain to them how we're going to be rolling this out. And that's where you can say, hey, I want to make sure we get this in place. This is super important. We want to create that wow experience every time. I want to get this implemented as quickly as possible. So I'm going to be shadowing each of you once per week for the next quarter or for the next month, whatever you can do. I encourage you, the more, the better, because what's going to happen is initially it's just going to be people remembering the sequence, and then it'll be people actually improving on the elements of the sequence, right? So it's not just hit them and try to get all of them done without having to use a cheat sheet, but more so than like really refining each section. Okay. So go through all of that with them on that day, set the expectations, set the schedule, and go to town. Okay. So, those are the 3 steps for implementation. I highly encourage you guys to implement a version of this in your gym as soon as possible, because this is, like I said, it's going to be a huge, you're going to notice from your members, and this is what I've heard from the people we've had implement this that we work with, is that you get almost immediate feedback from your members going, wow, something around here is changing and it's freaking awesome. And they're going to start noticing very quickly. So feedback is going to grow, and the buzz amongst your members is going to become very apparent very quickly by rolling even the most basic version of this thing out. Okay. Now I want to kind of jump back to something I kind of breezed or kind of skipped over when I went through the class structure, and this will again be in the scorecard. But one of the things that is super important in each class, okay, and this is kind of more conceptual, is that you want each one of your members to feel individually recognized, okay? So not part of a class or just part of a group. It's super important that every single member felt like they got a personal touch in the class, okay? So what we did as even part of the scorecard is I would actually list out, if I were shadowing my coach, in the beginning of class, I would literally list out every person's name that's in the class, put them in the list. There's a section on this on the last page of the scorecard. And then what I would do is, did you use their name? Yes or no? At least once in the class. Did you cue them on something? Did you then correct them? Did you give them feedback? And then did you address something personal with each person? Now, I'm not talking about like, hey, how's your marriage? I'm just talking about any sort of like personal interaction, like, hey, how have those couch stretches before class been going for you? Or, dude, awesome job on those kettlebell swings today, looking fantastic. Just some sort of personal recognition or acknowledgement beyond just cueing, correcting, feedback. And it completely changed how members felt in each class. You want to talk about retention, and you want to talk about like people feeling like they're a part of something, that they feel important. Remember, we have to look at each class like if you have 10 people in a class, you have 10 personal training clients in your class. You need to make them feel that way. You don't, just because it's a group, get to be excused that, hey, I've got 10 of you or 15 of you or 20 of you. which should, to you, if you're like, man, but I can't do that with 20, 25 people, then maybe you should reconsider 20 or 25 people, or say, okay, well, how can we accomplish that? Maybe I need an assistant coach past a certain number during my busier times. It's very important that each person feels individually acknowledged. You will keep people for a lifetime when you do that, because they feel like they matter individually. Cool. So super important. Make it each person feel acknowledged. And I think at this point I can open it up to some questions. So if any of you guys have any questions, feel free to put them out, start typing them in the comments here. I'm going to be putting the I'm going to start having these prepped a little bit sooner, and because this is something I'm just starting to roll out now. Let me see here. I think that covers the structure here, guys. Cool. So if you guys have questions, put them in now. And if not, no sweat. Just type them into the comments here after the fact. I always swing back in and answer questions in the comments for anyone who has them after the fact. So it looks like that's it for today. And I wish you guys a wonderful Friday. Have yourselves a great weekend, and we will see you guys again next week. Bye-bye.